Good morning once again, everybody, and good morning to the panelists. This morning, the Fireside Panel, we're exploring the topic, the future of Caribbean-Africa collaboration. Now, when we speak about Africa and the Caribbean, the connection is often through shared history or cultural affinity. Today's conversation is intentionally forward-focused. It's about structure, movement, and opportunity. It's about how Africa and the Caribbean collaborate with purpose across business, policy, technology, culture, and people-centered development. I'm joined by three panelists this morning who will approach this bridge from different but complementary perspectives. So think strategy, lived experience, and economic execution. First, to ground us, I will start with one question for all the panelists. The question, looking ahead to the next decade, what does meaningful Africa-Caribbean collaboration actually look like to you? And what personal or professional experiences have shaped how you see that future?
Wow, so I got the push and the shove. Hi everyone, my name is Alisha Ali. I am from St. Lucia, and I have been working on the global South-South collaboration. In terms of a blueprint for the future of Africa-Caribbean collaboration, what we need to understand is that together, we are about 1.5 billion people strong. We could have a unified global market structure. We do not need to rely on the global north. However, there are certain things that we need to do. Thank you, Joel. No, I'm very serious. So in terms of what we need to do, we need to understand that we need to remove the barriers between the Africa-Caribbean collaboration. In Africa, it's still an 88% tariff on Caribbean rum. And that is one of our main exports. Let's remove the barrier. It's not that difficult. We also have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is 54 countries on the African continent, $3.4 trillion in GDP. We need to align our policies and our frameworks to be able to take advantage of that, to be able to integrate into that system. We need connectivity. I think a good doctor from Barbados said it. Shipping and logistics, we need to improve that. And we also need to improve our air service. I mean, that's a little bit difficult for us in the Caribbean region when it took me forever to get from St. Lucia to Dominica. So I don't know how I'm going to get from St. Lucia to Ghana, right? But we also need to understand, and you alluded to it in terms of our shared stories. Our creative industries are nothing like I have seen across the world. We are unique, we are authentic, and we need to stop letting people tell our stories. For example, there's Echoes Across the Oceans, and there are Caribbean and African short stories. As much as we are similar, we are very different. St. Lucia and Dominica share similarities, but the uniqueness is in our authenticity and in our differences. And instead of letting those differences separate us, we need to understand that is what brings us together as a people, as a Caribbean, as a global South.
Thank you very much, Alisha. Dr. Afana, your thoughts?
Thank you. Dr. Afana, Clementine Afana, I go by Travel with Clem. And I would like to touch on 3 points. The first one is the story. I think as somebody who has lived in the Caribbean for 16 years now, honorary Dominican, I'm literally ready for my passport. And I've traveled to 29 countries, I grew up in Cameroon, and I have had the opportunity to explore the Black narratives in the Caribbean and in the African American narrative as well. I would say the shared story. I think we need to not retell the story, but I think we need to tell the full story. You know, from my perspective, growing up in Cameroon, I know the story of Africa, but I don't know the story of what my African brothers, you know, did as soon as they left the shore unwillingly. So I think that in itself creates a barrier in the way we understand each other. Similarly, I learned that from the Caribbean narratives, people don't know how Africans fought, you know, that separation. And we need to tell that story. And from the African American narratives, a lot of people don't even know how the Africans who were there, once they were there, they still resisted and they created their other micro communities to empower each other. So I think there's so much fragmentation in the way our story is told that we don't even know the full story. So I think we need to tell the full story because it will help us to better understand each other and to better accept and celebrate each other for who we are and for what we are doing right now. The second thing that we need to do is to work on access. Alisha said it so beautifully, and Dr. Lake said it as well. We need to be able to access the region easily, right? It took you forever to, you just spoke about the story that you just had, and traveling, a lot of people in the Caribbean feel like traveling to Africa feels like it's going to take days. Now, I will tell you, when I came to Dominica 16 years ago, it indeed took days with layovers that I didn't want to do, and I was almost sent back to my own country, right? But it shouldn't be that hard at this point. So I think we need to facilitate airline connectivity between different Caribbean islands and different African metropolis. And then the third thing that I think we need to focus on when we talk about access is also visa access. We need to make it easier for us to travel and see each other. It shouldn't be, I shouldn't have to do multiple steps for me to come to any other Caribbean islands, and whereas it's easier for me to go to Europe, it's easier for me to go to America and so forth. Those things on its own make it feel so hard, and it makes it feel so much like Africa is so far or the Caribbean is so far away, whereas if our government and the policymakers actually prioritize fostering those relationships, it's going to make it easier. And to go back to the point that like beautiful co-panelists here said, we don't necessarily need the rest of the world. I mean, we kind of do because we are in the world, but if we look at our numbers and who we are as the black power that we empower, we can literally run our own thing and not worry about what is happening anywhere else because we on our own are power. So those are the 3 points that I will focus on as priority. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Afana. Mr. Oguzie, your thoughts?
Yes, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you. You're audible.
Oh, awesome. Okay, all right. A very good afternoon here, and I'm joining from Nova Scotia in Canada. It's very cold right now, so I sort of envy you guys right now. I would have loved to be in Dominica, but of course, due to certain reasons, I'm unable to make it. So first of all, I want to say, a big congratulations and well done to Alisha and her team. In terms of the work they've been doing consistently, and of course, hosting this event this year. It's only the doers that understand how much time and effort it takes to bring people together and sort of create sort of coalitions like this. So, once again, I say well done and congratulations. I don't have much to add, basically, because both speakers have actually highlighted some of it. But I think for me, why I think this conversation is really timely is that if you look at the shift in geopolitics and everything going on in terms of historically most of the Caribbean partners, trading partners being more like North America and Europe, and of course Africa doing a lot more within Europe as well. And right now we're moving into a very multipolar society whereby the usual trade partners or power brokers, like I like to call it, are looking for alternatives. That has all of a sudden opened up a new wave of opportunities, especially around outside cooperation. So in this case, African Caribbean, I think for a long time we've sort of had some levels of connectivity, but it has been focused more on arts and culture. People think, from the Caribbean, you think, oh, Africa, yeah, I really want to think about my roots and all of that. Same like people from the continent, Africa, who think about the Caribbean as, oh yeah, I think it's really great to know where my brothers and sisters ended, how they're faring and all of that, how can I connect? But we know when times really get tough, what really keeps people going is the economic side of things, which is people are thinking about how can they sustain their livelihoods, which is why right now, economic integration and trade has become very, very important in these conversations. And just to add to what the speakers have talked about, we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, of course, which is a big thing. Like, we talked about it, 1.3 billion people on the continent. Now you also have the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, which is an initiative aimed to really create a synergy between CARICOM, and of course that then gives leverage to be able to engage in trade outside that region. But we don't really have a very strong bridge linking these two wonderful initiatives. So a very good starting point would be, how can we start having conversation with policymakers to sort of integrate these two free trade agreements or these two initiatives, and how can then we then create a bigger economy between these two regions? But then when you then start talking about that, you start looking into some of the challenges. Everyone talked about, we don't have this whole direct flights between two regions. That's a big thing, because that's a big obstacle for trade and investment if you can move people and goods easily. And then to make it worse, we don't even have a direct shipping route. So if I want to move mangoes from Jamaica or maybe TNT, Trinidad and Tobago, to somewhere, Cameroon or Nigeria and all of that, I have to go all across the continent. I have to go all the way to Europe, be it Rotterdam or Brussels and all of that. That then, creates more cost. Then time as well. When you look at perishable goods, that even makes the whole logistics a nightmare. So one of the key things then has to be, how do we ensure we create direct shipping routes that goes from this region to that region? But then you cannot create shipping routes based on the conversations that I've had with some of the stakeholders and business players without having volume of trade. So which one do you go first? How do you then increase the trade between both regions? How do you ensure that, whatever regions in Africa they're exporting to the Caribbean or vice versa, we up that number by 10x or 20x, which then creates that sort of commercial opportunity for the shipping lines to start thinking about, creating those direct routes. And to add that, the second point, which I'll probably just round off with that, just for the sake of time, would be thinking about what are some of the things that we're already doing well within both regions. How can we ensure that we ramp some of those? Creatives industry, for example. I know there's been a lot of collaboration within the creative industry, from arts, culture, music, between African and Caribbean. What are some of the ways we can create government policies, pseudo-government agencies? How can they come up to increase the volume of some of those connections? And that can then help bolster some of the other trade, investment, and all the other commercial opportunities. So I would just sort of end it at that, and then we can take more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. To build anything lasting, you start with structure. Before we talk about movement, markets, or culture, we need to understand the strategic foundation that can support Africa-Caribbean collaboration at scale. So let's begin there. Let's talk big picture strategy and architecture. I'll first speak to Alisha Ali, one of our panelists. We're approaching this conversation from systems and strategy perspective. Alisha Ali is a Pan-African strategist and international development leader whose work focuses on cross-border partnerships, policy alignment, and long-term global positioning. Alisha, from a strategic standpoint, how can Africa and the Caribbean position themselves as collective players in global markets rather than operating in parallel or in competition?
I think foundationally I need to go back to the keynote by Karim Geist. We tend to think of ourselves as other. We tend to think we are not as smart or as good. And as someone who has worked in the US, I travel quite a bit, I can tell you, they're not smarter than us. They're not more innovative than us. What they do have, the people out there who we hold on a pedestal, is the audacity to believe in themselves, which is something that we do not have as a Caribbean African bloc. So what we need to do is start there first and foremost. I know Karim follows me on LinkedIn, so does Lizra. I don't post on my LinkedIn. My team, my social media team, is based in Kenya. A 7-hour difference. They're the ones who handle my personal branding from St. Lucia. And that is what we talk about in terms of institutionalizing partnerships. We've had the Africa CARICOM Summit 2021, it was the first one. 2025, we had a second one. MOUs have been signed. Great. What we need to establish is an African Caribbean economic corridor, with our own trade rules, with our own currencies, with our own people. And in order to do that, we need to have sustainable frameworks, not just MOUs, not just talk shops. We need to have sustainable frameworks in place for financing. I think someone alluded to the Afrexim Bank. A National Bank of Dominica is here. Afrexim Bank has made US 1.5 million available to the Caribbean to facilitate that partnership. What I would like to see is our Caribbean banks, our Caribbean financial institutions. I can hear myself. Our Caribbean financial institutions innovating to be able to elevate us as a people, because we still have a startup ecosystem that we are not taking advantage of. We are as innovative as they come. I was speaking to Mr. Ezra Fabian yesterday. Innovation is in our bones. We have always figured out how to do more with less. But we need to remove the traditional mental barriers that we have that say we only need to stick within this particular box. Throw out the box. Let us create a new box, a new table. Let us look at reimagining our international financial architecture, like Prime Minister Motley said in the Bridgetown Initiative. The international financial system was not made for us. We did not contribute to it. It is something that has been handed to us, something that has been a thorn in our side. Whether it is the IMF and their rules and they're coming in to restructure, they don't understand us and who we are as a people and our culture. And we need to take back our power. We need to control our narrative. And we need to create systems that benefit us.
Thank you very much for that. I continue with you. Where do you see the strongest opportunity for policy alignment, whether in trade, investment, or diaspora engagement, that could create near-term momentum?
Near-term momentum. So we do have quite a large Caribbean African diaspora within the UK, within the US, within Canada. For example, the National Business League of America, which was previously called the National Negro Business League, has 127,000 members. Of that, Caribbean descent, African descent. These are people who already have capital ready to invest in the Caribbean and in Africa. We don't necessarily need to always depend on government and government policy. We need to start looking at the corporate sector, the private sector. That is where we need to start. And in terms of what we spoke about, shipping, trade, and logistics, that is what we need to figure out. And in the interim, we need to find a workaround. Because if the frameworks are not in place, as I said, we've done less with more. When we didn't have running water in our pipes, we went down to the river and we figured out how to wash our clothes by the river and cook by the river and do everything by the river. We have always figured out how to innovate. And this is an opportunity for the Caribbean and Africa to figure out how to innovate. I used my social media team as an example. There's no shipping and logistics in there. We are remotely communicating. We are remotely working. We have to understand the culture of our brothers and sisters on the African continent, but they also have to understand us as well. It is possible. I am not saying it's going to be easy, because even with my team, there was a learning curve. There was a learning curve, so they understood what I wanted, but it was not something that was very well known on the African continent and the clients that they worked with. So it's about patience, it's about innovation, but more importantly, it is about us being authentic and being very honest with ourselves about what it is we want from this partnership and having the will, the ambition, and the hunger to make it happen.
Thank you for that. A narrative shapes perception, and power. How can storytelling, the media, and shared identity shift how Africa and the Caribbean engage each other and how the world engages with us?
That's a very good question. So I am a storyteller. I started off my life in the media. I think I met a young lady who is with DBS Radio here, and I was explaining to her, I started off my life as a journalist. It is important, and I reference Echoes Across the Ocean, which is an anthology of short films between the Caribbean and Africa. And it is important for us to tell our stories. I travel extensively. I go to conferences, and people still refer to us as third world. People still ask me, do you have electricity? People still ask me, like, how's the internet connection? So you have people telling our stories, and we do not understand how that influences us, our psyche, our children, because they grow up thinking they are lesser than. They are not good enough to make it on a global stage. And it is important to show them examples of us being not only able to break barriers, but to take over the world. I'm from St. Lucia, grew up in a very impoverished community. I got a job in Silicon Valley that I did not apply for. They came and they looked for me on a 238 square mile rock in the middle of the ocean. They could have chosen anybody else. And I headed marketing and communication for a very large venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, which I never even thought was possible for me as a young girl growing up in St. Lucia. It is important that we tell our stories and shift the narrative, not just for the global north to see us for who we are, but for us to believe in ourselves, in our capabilities, and what we can achieve. And it also helps us. I know we have a shared culture with the Caribbean and Africa, but again, we have differences, we have nuances. How are we to understand each other if we do not tell our stories?
Agreed. Thank you. Now, institutionally, what is missing now? What frameworks or networks are needed to move collaboration from intention to execution?
That is a very, very heavy question. So I spoke about the Africa CARICOM Summit. We do have frameworks. So again, a major framework in terms of tariffs. I referenced in the beginning the 88% tariffs on Caribbean rum. How are we supposed to export when we have these types of trade barriers? So what we need to look at is the trade barriers first and foremost. We need to have proper frameworks for shipping. I met someone here who just opened a shipping company in St. Lucia. Wouldn't it be great if she opened that shipping company in Rwanda and we can now export from Dominica straight to Rwanda? These are the frameworks that are missing, but in order to do that, we need to have the financing structure in place. So when the entrepreneur from Dominica with her shipping company goes to the bank, and I'm not going to put the current bank on the spot, goes to the bank, and the bank is now looking at the risks and the assessment, they can say, listen, all right, fine, I will give you the funding to do this. Show us your business plan, show us your profit and loss, show us your projections, and then I take a chance on you based on that. That is what we are missing, the financial infrastructure, but also we do need the policy makers, and there's one policy maker in the room and I'm looking at him, the policy makers' fortitude and the will to see it through. That is what is missing. Everything else is there. We can figure it out as we go along. This is new. We are bound to make mistakes. And as Kareem said, it is okay to make mistakes. Failure is just market research. Things that work, things that don't work, you learn the lessons and you move on.
Thank you very much, Alisha, for that presentation. Strategy gives us the blueprint, but collaboration is ultimately lived by people in communities, workplaces, and everyday interactions. I want us to now move from systems to stories and from architecture to experience. Up next, let's talk to Dr. Clementine Afana. She brings deeply human perspective into this discussion. She's a medical professional, entrepreneur, and global traveler who lived experience spans Cameroon, Dominica, and multiple international markets. Dr. Afana, from your lived experience, what supports successful integration between Africans and Caribbean societies, and where do you still encounter friction?
So I would say one thing that we have is we love our culture as Black people, and I think because I know the room, I can safely say as Black people, we love our culture. And so whenever we approach things from that heritage and cultural perspective, we tend to latch onto it and to listen to it more. So I think that is a very huge advantage. I know sometimes we might think that, you know what, we're always talking about culture, but that is our entry point because it's a shared culture, right? Coming to Dominica here, I know some of the dishes that Dominicans do, they call it differently, but back in Cameroon, we did the same thing. Similar with Nigeria, similar with, so many other places. The dances, those things, it's like our shared culture. So that's a great entry point. And I think always leading with what connects us is always a good way to get in the door, to be able to connect. The places where the points where I see most resistance and most barriers are when it comes to really trying to impose, let's say, African narratives to people from the Caribbean. Because people from the Caribbean, for example, my Caribbean brothers and sisters, they are Africans, but with another layer. And people from Africa, from the US, Black people from the US, they are also African, but with another layer. And I think every single time we don't account for those nuances and differences that make us a little bit more unique, a little bit more peculiar, a little bit more reactive to some things compared to others, then we drop the ball and we lose the connection. Initially, before I started traveling, as an African, born and raised, and I mean, I shouldn't even say African because we're all African, but born and raised in Cameroon, I was raised in a specific way, specific expectations, and my friends here in Dominica could not understand why there were nights where I will not go out, I have to study because I need to get straight A's, because I need to report back and explain why didn't I get straight A on my exam, right? Because my mom will ask me, the person who got straight A's, what are they eating that you're not eating? What are they doing that they're not doing? What air are they breathing that you're not breathing? So my background with a certain level of rigidity is different from how somebody here would have been raised. And so coming to the Caribbean, I also had to learn that, hey, your value is not just in that, but you have to relax a little bit. So I got more into the Siwo. I understood the Siwo culture. I let the Siwo culture being, I blend with the Siwo culture. Now, having been in that culture now and having lived that, I understand better why it matters and I can better connect with the Black people in the Caribbean. And so I think the points, the things that work are focusing on, are the things that show how similar we are. And the ways in which we fail is in failing to identify our different nuances. Even what Alisha was saying, people in Dominica are different from people in St. Lucia. And I asked one of the Kevins, sorry, one of the Kevins, I asked him, I can't remember I asked him something. No, it wasn't Kevin, sorry, sorry, Kevin. I asked Michael Lees, who was the person I networked with during my speed networking hour. I asked him, I told him I thought that people in the Caribbean knew all the nuances, like knew what makes them different, and he's like, no, it's not something that is, known like that. And so I feel failing to identify those nuances really is kind of like shooting ourselves in the leg because we don't realize that even though we are similar, we are also different.
Thank you, Dr. Afana. People-to-people exchange is often described as a foundation for long-term partnerships. Why is mobility and cultural understanding so central to Africa-Caribbean collaboration?
Thank you. Mobility and cultural understanding. So cultural understanding, specifically for the point that I just made here, we are similar. We are more similar than we are different, but we need to acknowledge the things that make us different so that we know how to communicate with each other better, right? The way I would approach how I communicate with, somebody from like the Caribbean will be different from how I'll approach communicating with somebody who was, born and raised in Africa. So that taking the time to understand those nuances is critical. Even though we look the same, we are not the same. Mobility, because we need to be able to access, we need to have like no borders, literally. We need to be able to access the region, the different regions as easily as possible. And, you know, that starts with demystifying the different regions. I remember coming to Dominica again 16 years ago, and I would always tell that story. Now I can laugh about it because now it feels like forever and ever ago. But when my sister and we had to book our flight to Dominica, we literally had to go to the travel agency, and I think maybe that's why I'm traveling with Clem right now, because we had to go to the travel agency with printed itineraries to show them that this is where Dominica is. We went to the travel agency with our African mother, already frustrated because she's a single mom. She's frustrated because she's been up with us for like the longest night, and she has to work in the morning, so we had to do all the work. And the people at the travel agency, the lady was looking at me face to face, and she's like, Dominica does not exist. And I'm like, yes, it does. And she's looking at me, it does not exist. And I had to print it and show her, this is where it is. It's that small dot. You can't see it because it's printed, but it's there, right? And that's why I'm going to school. That's why I'm going to medical school. Then she goes back on her little computer, clickety clack clack with her long nails, and she's like, oh, chewing gum very loudly, and she's like, oh, the Dominican Republic. And I'm like, no, Dominica. And every single time, it was always the same thing. Why? Because people don't know. And so when we talk about mobility, why is it important? Because it's important for us to be able to move across regions easily, as easy as it is for an African to say, I'm going to France, I'm going to the US, I'm going to Canada. It should be easy for them to say, I'm booking a flight to Dominica for Carnival, I'm going to Barbados for Crop Over, I'm going to Grenada for for Spice Mass, right? It should be that easy. And I think unless we demystify it, unless we make it mainstream destinations, like everywhere else we have been brainwashed to think are better, unless we do that, we're not going to see how easy it is. And I think it's very possible, specifically because the Black diaspora in general is on that wave of reconnecting, is on that wave of reclaiming the narratives. And I think if we continue having these conversations and then these meetings, eventually, they're going to listen and the door is going to be opened.
Thank you very much. What can Africans and Caribbeans learn from each other when it comes to work ethic, business resilience, and community systems?
Switch mic? Yes. I like that little mic being switched. Oh. Don't move too much. Oh, come on, I was feeling it. All right, yeah. All right. So you said business ethics. What was the other thing?
Business ethics, community systems, and work ethic. Work ethic, business resilience, and community systems.
Okay, work ethics, business resilience, and community systems. So work ethics. So I think what the Caribbean can learn, I think we already have it actually, but I think it needs to be reawakened. I think it needs to be shaken up. I think people just need to be reminded of that, because I genuinely feel like as Black people, we have that resilience that makes us be able to do the things that we don't even think we can do, right? When we talk about work ethics, I'm speaking from my personal background. In an African household, we will always be operating based on results. And it's like, you don't stop until you get the results. I follow football a lot, I follow sports a lot, and coming from Cameroon, we have amazing players. We have Joel Embiid, who is in basketball. We have Francis Ngannou, who is a boxer. I think he's MMA, I don't know what is the term, but like he's very big and he's a boxer. And essentially, and then we have our football team, the Indomitable Lions, obviously we just got eliminated from the AFCON, but we are still indomitable. And our motto, we literally let them win because Morocco is a host country. So they need to look good. We are fair players. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I think as a people, one thing that people have realized about Cameroon, but by extension Africa, is that we are resilient and we don't give up until you get the results. You will fall 7 times, you need to stand up the 8th time. And I think a lot of times, having seen how some of my Caribbean brothers and sisters operate, we are too quick to give up. To go back to the point that Karim was making earlier, such a beautiful keynote, we tend to feel like when we fail, it's the end. And we tend to look at ourselves from that negative lens. But when you fail, it's actually the beginning. Like, we need to learn. We need to be comfortable failing. We need to be okay failing. and be like, okay, fine, I failed. Now let me start again. Let's not just focus on, okay, I failed, let me be in my feelings. Yeah, be in your feelings, cry, but figure out, okay, why did I fail? Was I not advertising enough? Was I not marketing enough? Was I not promoting enough? Was I not looking at my numbers enough? Instead of settling on the failure, look at where it went wrong and then adjust and try again. And there is just no way a person who shows up every single day, even after they fail, is not going to win, because when you show up consistently all the time and you adjust your strategy, success is inevitable. So I think for some of our Caribbean brothers and sisters, we need to tap back into that lion energy and just see success as the only outcome. You also mentioned another point, which was regarding business and regarding ethics. I think we already have it within us, but one point that I want to mention is it's important for us to lead from the perspective of being good. People have this assumption that whenever something is done by black people, either it's not good quality, or it's fake, or they're trying to cheat you, or they're trying to make a profit and win more. But I think that the more people see examples of value-driven people who are leading with good, people who are leading with ethics, people who are leading with their name and their reputation, the more people see it, the more people will be inclined to do what's good. Because one of the reasons why people do bad or like they cheat is because sometimes they feel like it's the only way. And the people who are doing good are not loud enough. They are not showing the example to show people that you can actually do things well. You don't have to cheat. You don't have to steal. You don't have to sleep. You can lead with your values. So I think the more we stand on that ground and the more we continue, and we show that you can succeed that way, we can encourage other people to do that. So for me on business ethics, that's what I would recommend. Dispel the narrative and show that you can win by doing good. Thank you.
Thank you. And briefly, what specific steps could reduce integration barriers such as visa access, recognition of qualifications, and cultural orientation?
Briefly, so first, we need to have cultural orientation, cross-cultural exchanges between countries, right? People in the Caribbean need to know when all the major festivals in Africa are happening and need to plan to attend, right? At least even having that awareness is already a good thing. In Benin right now, they're having a huge African cultural festival. It's every January. The same way we want to have on the lineup, when Coachella is, when the WCMF is, we also need to know when things are happening on the continent so that we can also potentially make plans to attend. And then for Africa, it's going to be the same. We need to know when those major cultural extravaganza seasons are happening in the Caribbean for us to connect. The second thing you talked about, visa restrictions. Head of states needs to sit down together and rewrite those agreements. Visa agreements and visa rules are based on political rules, right? And my brother here in Nova Scotia mentioned that we are in a very interesting geopolitical season right now. So the head of states need to strategically sit down together and rewrite those agreements. There shouldn't be any friction between our countries, at least with the African diaspora, to be able to access where they go. Like, it's wild that for me, I know Monelle said briefly, but literally as a traveler, I look at the places in the Caribbean where I can go visa-free, and I go there first. Because whenever you think about applying for a visa, you're thinking about flying to that place, paying the visa fee, submitting all your entire life history, who you marry, who didn't marry, how much you made 5 years ago, all these things is like a headache. And if you have to think about all that every single time you need to move, it's not going to work. So the head of states need to work together to make sure that those rules, those political rules or those agreements are rewritten so that it can facilitate exchange and travel between our different regions. And then the third thing that I think should be done is encouraging the diaspora, the African diaspora, specifically from the Caribbean, to come back home and invest. Like Alisha said, it's not a lack of money. People have money, and they need to know that they can bring it back to the continent. Places like Ghana, places like, I think, Benin also, and Nigeria to a certain extent, and Kenya are putting together programs to welcome the diaspora home. You can come and have real estate. You can come and build a home. You can come and literally do your ancestry test and claim citizenship, knowing, where most of our brothers were taken from. All those things are incentives that can be put together to actually encourage the diaspora to come back home and to really pour back into the economy and to reclaim their roots. So those are my suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Afana. Now, human connection builds trust and creates opportunity. The next question is on how that trust is translated into enterprise, investment, and measurable economic outcomes. That brings us to the economic engine of Africa-Caribbean collaboration. In this segment, we speak to Mr. Kenneth Oguzie, a trade and investment leader and diaspora advocate focused on turning cross-continental relationships into enterprise, capital flow, and growth. Kenneth, your first question from your perspective. What does functional Africa-Caribbean investment corridor look like in practice?
These submissions from Dr. Clem and Alisha. It's been a pleasure, listening to you both, and I think the passion you both have around this conversation is very impressive. So I think, I would like to say well done. And Dr. Clem, just to add, Nigeria qualified for the next stage, so we'll be playing Morocco.
Excuse me, yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes. So we'll be taking revenge on Cameroon's behalf, on the ongoing Africa Cup of Nations. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, great questions around building practical investment corridors. I think there's a few things that need to really be, we need to really review and think about it. So first of all, right now, the last I checked, there isn't really a very sort of solid, trade agreement between both regions, and I think that's based on the fact that it's about building a strong business case. So when you think about right now, only 3% of exports from the Caribbean goes to Africa. That is tiny. And even from Africa to Caribbean, the figures are not the most impressive when you look at it. But then, what are some of the issues which is like sort of hindering some of this trade? Of course, there's a bit of a mismatch when you look at the population of the Caribbean and of course Africa. We know that for sure. But I think we're not still maximizing it based on what we need to do. And that starts from the policymakers. I think the policymakers really need to start looking beyond the traditional business partners, in North America, in South America, in Europe, and all of that, and start looking at these collaborations to go beyond cultural or beyond trying to do business with my brothers and my sisters, because there's a unique opportunity there. Thinking about how both economies and from both regions can really, benefit by having that, And also, someone talked about the fact that right now we don't even have a lot of support schemes from a financial standpoint. What are some of the multilaterals doing? If an SME from Jamaica or in Trinidad or somewhere in Dominica wants to start exporting a certain product, most of the time they have to go to some of the traditional intermediaries, and these traditional intermediaries are not set up for this sort of trade. Some of them don't see beyond the fact that, we already have established markets, so we don't think you should be going to. So all these requirements and barriers would then hinder this individual or this SME. How about we start thinking about having dedicated funds for this type of stuff? I know Afrexim has some of it, but when you think about a lot of these organizations, they are catered to middle and big enterprises. And this is one of the reasons why I actually set up my business close to a decade ago, because I found out that most times people think an exporter has to be a business doing 10 million, 20 million turnover. But I'm like, what's really an export? It's all about taking the goods and services from point A to point B, build those relationships. In this case, Africa and Caribbean have a lot of shared history, and some of those barriers which people typically have based on culture is minimized to a great extent. So building those investment corridors are not even as sophisticated or complicated as we would think it should. But I think it's all about policies, really thinking about policymakers, thinking about how can we cut all the crap in front of it. How can we just think about actionable policies and of course leverage the power of small businesses, because a lot of them are very open, but I think there isn't a lot of platforms to create those sort of trade opportunities.
Thank you, Kenneth. Your next question. Diaspora leadership is often cited as a catalyst for growth. How can diaspora investors realistically unlock capital, trust, and market access across regions?
So I always think about diaspora as a bridge, of course, because of course these are individuals who have left their home countries. You know, someone like myself, I was born in Nigeria, but I've lived in 5 different countries across 4 different continents. And I think I mean, I have, having, based on my travels and my life experiences, I have been sort of, you know, engaging and communicating with, you know, my brothers and sisters from the Caribbean, living in the UK and all of that. But then last year, I got on a program, you know, Center for Commonwealth and Leadership Development Program. And that was actually where I got to meet Lisra, and of course there's another gentleman, Kenneth, whom I saw as well, you know, great guy. And I think we spent close to 2 weeks, you know, doing a lot of, working on a lot of projects, starting from Barbados and all of that. But for me, the most important thing in it all was I met a group of, you know, individuals from the Caribbean spread across, powerful people doing excellent stuff on the continent, and really learned a lot. It opened my eyes to, you know, of course, strengthening my position in terms of what the diaspora can be. But then, of course, opened my eyes to a lot of, you know, business thinking, the way policies are drafted in the Caribbean, understanding the nuances and all of that. But this is me, someone who has traveled to 22 countries and has lived in 5, and my eyes were just opened to that level. Imagine a random person living in, you know, somewhere in Kingston or somewhere in Accra or somewhere in Lagos. They don't even know a lot about that. So the diaspora are individuals that can actually help in terms of enlightening people and sensitizing, you know, individuals around the opportunities and helping to sort of create that market bridge. Also, they're also a good source of market intelligence. A lot of times, individuals from, you know, someone from, like, let's say someone in Barbados, for example, say, you know what, I'm thinking of doing this and all of that. They can leverage a lot of information from a diaspora member who lives in Europe or who lives somewhere on the continent, working or doing business, as the first source of information, up-to-date information, communicated to them in the way they understand, because they share joint culture. So these are some of the powerful pieces. And of course, we also look at remittances. I mean, I think it was Alisha that spoke about diaspora investments within the local, you know, within the countries of origin and all of that. But when we also look at some of the challenges, there, one of the reasons why when you talk to some of the diaspora members around why you're not doing a lot from a commercial standpoint in your country, is the fact that they still talk about lack of institutional frameworks. So I remember a conversation I was having with someone, and you know, there was on a panel, we were talking about some of the stuff they needed to do in a country in West Africa, how we needed to pull capital and all of that. And someone said, we should not describe this conversation as if we don't know the realities. There are still a lot of things that need to be fixed on the continent, and holding policymakers accountable is a big part of it. So, but I think when we go into these conversations, we need to also stay very realistic around, it's not just easy when you see diaspora members who have toiled, sweat and blood, building it in a country outside theirs. And of course, they have the luxury of sitting in a system where they feel like, you know what, I have some level of security when I move my money or do this and all of that. And say, hey, based on sentiment, just take it home. No, it's not that easy. And I think we should be doing that. I think we should be investing back home. But I also think there's a great emphasis in holding some of the policymakers accountable around creating frameworks that can hedge the risk and make it even more attractive.
Thank you. Your presentation brings me to this question. What does the Caribbean need to do differently to attract sustainable African investment beyond incentives and symbolic engagement?
All right, thank you very much for that question. I think so. When we look at, I would even start off from investment, for example. There's a lot of capital in Africa, you know, and it's interesting because last year we did a multi-million-dollar deal whereby we brought investment from Africa to Nova Scotia, you know, which was mind-blowing because people would think normally capital will go from the other way around. But then I should be working on those investments from Africa into the Caribbean rather. So, but then the question starts from how much do these investors on the continent even know about the Caribbean beyond cultural? And you know, a place where okay, yeah, the Caribbean is we have shared history, we have shared good. So the first part that I think is very important is that we should look at having a lot of more trade missions, for example, from the Caribbean to Africa. These trade missions would involve working with investment agencies, both investment agencies for both regions. We take businesses, we take stakeholders, so that stakeholders can actually see the opportunities that lie there, vice versa. So when you create that, because there's a lot of things about education and opportunities, and if you don't know, you don't know. So imagine a situation where we have stronger collaboration between investment and trade agencies of both regions. We have multi-trade missions. We have any sort of event whereby individuals can come and showcase or talk about the massive array of opportunities. That would be a good starting point in terms of bringing, creating that opportunity. The second piece is, of course, Africa is a big market, so it's a great destination in terms of export of goods from the Caribbean, which, like I alluded to earlier, right now is like 3%. But then, when you ramp up production from the Caribbean, you can actually go into the African market with a lot of things, whereby all of a sudden you have access. And the great thing is you're doing business with people that look just like you, people that they're your brothers and sisters. So that it doesn't even get better than that. So you don't have to go through that whole so much of extreme cultures whereby when you do business with the European, whereby there's so many extra nuances that you have to deal with, which can mar the progress or the success of that business venture. So thinking about what are some of the ways we can create that that platform whereby individuals can engage directly with some of them. And of course, the last thing which I wanted to also talk about, we need to have more collaboration, especially around the banking system between Africa and Caribbean, because let's face it, trade and investment is about money is very critical. And moving this money around and sort of moving capital from one region to the other, most times we have to go through intermediaries, Europe and North America, which then creates another layer of bureaucracy, issues, and some of the things that they might not even understand why we're doing it or how we're doing it. So I think there's a unique opportunity in terms of within the financial sector for banks to have stronger collaboration, financial institutions. So I want to see, the bank in Dominica having a solid agreement with the bank in Ghana, whereby they have that sort of collaboration, so that when you have businesses, stakeholders, investors who want to move capital from both regions or who want to facilitate payments, whatever it is, cross-border, it's easy for them, and then they don't have to go through the usual hurdles. So I think that's another added one that I had to throw in there.
Thank you. Can you share a success story that show how Africa-Caribbean entrepreneurship and cross-border business can work?
There's a lot of success story. I remember there was a Nigerian fintech. I don't remember the name, but I know they partnered with a Guyanese bank, and they were working on some digital wallets for bank workers within the oil and gas sector. And I think that whole project was focused on the individual, sort of figuring out what really works for both. Because I think what stood out in the whole transaction was the localization mindset. So basically, there was a strong element around protecting the Nigerian, culture around the way business is done, as well as the Guyanese one, which is why that succeeded. But I also know that there's a lot of strong collaboration in terms of Jamaican coffee producers using some digital tracking equipment that was manufactured in Rwanda, whereby they then use that to help them verify fair trade, all the fair trade status, because how within the coffee sector, that's a huge, that's a big deal. That's something that you typically will talk about. But beyond that, I know that right now there's still a lot of ongoing conversation. I like the position of AfroExim Bank in terms of what it's doing. I foresee a lot of opportunities coming up in terms of the whole presence in Barbados and in terms of the body language of AfroExim as a whole. So I'm very optimistic, and I think we will definitely see more success stories as things progress.
And your final question, which sectors are most ready for diaspora-led acceleration and why?
So I like the tech sector. I'm a big advocate of the tech sector because I think it was Dr. Clem who mentioned the fact that the tech sector is just you have a computer, you have power, you plug it in, and you start talking to someone and you start doing stuff together. So that the tech sector is very immune to some of the traditional red tape or bureaucracy you have when you have to ship products and services. So I like the tech sector. I'm always very big on the tech sector. The creatives is another one. We do have the arts and culture, of course. We talk about looking at films and musical collaborations. But I think we need to ramp that up in terms of making it a bit more commercial. We need to see the African and Caribbean as serious business partners, not just brothers and sisters, but serious business partners. So I sometimes like go into conversations and I see there's a bit of sentimental conversations. Oh, we need to do this because these are brothers and sisters. I say, yeah, that's great. That's always a good starting point. But we need to really think about it from a very strong commercial standpoint, because let's not forget that the whole point of doing business is to improve livelihoods. And African and Caribbean, we still have a lot of our people that need support, a lot of people that need economic support. So let's always see ourselves as leaders. A lot of us in this room, a lot of us in this call, in the panel, let's see ourselves as leaders who can drive this economic growth and support. What else can I think? I mean, right now, of course, we also have to think about other sectors like agriculture. I know there's a lot of oil as well. There's a lot of export of oil from the continent to Caribbean, crude oil and from countries like Nigeria and all of that. But I think right now that we can actually look at the low-hanging fruits, which are like the tech sector, the arts, creative, because these sectors, like I said earlier, they are immune to the usual bureaucracy and red tape, but then we need to find ways to ramp them up, be it working with policy makers, be it organizing trade missions and partnerships, and be it using diaspora individuals, both at the individual level and at the aggregate level, to expose people to the array of opportunities, to expose people to the amount of support out there, and to really make people feel like we need to lock in on these both regions and move away and stop thinking solely around North America, Europe, and the traditional business partners.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we've looked at vision, lived realities, and economic execution. The opportunity now is to connect with perspectives and focus on how we can move the needle. Let's bring all the voices together in one conversation. This question: what role should youth and professionals play in shaping the next phase in Africa-Caribbean engagement?
That's a really good question, and I will keep it very succinct. We need to engage in radical collaboration, not the usual, as Kenneth was saying. Think of new, innovative things. Be delusional. Be absolutely unhinged in your ideas, because that is the only way for us to progress and move forward. Earlier, we spoke about, our authenticity, us being innovative as a people, as a Caribbean and African people. The only way for us to move forward is to really move out of the mentality that we have been socialized into, where there are boxes, where there are boundaries, where we cannot achieve certain things. And I think for us as a Caribbean people, as an African people, we need to reimagine what a system looks like for us that is successful. And that goes back to what our keynote Kareem was speaking about. We need to define success for ourselves and what it looks like, instead of adhering to the systemic discrimination that we have been subjected to. We need to move out of that.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. The role of youth is critical. I mean, they are going to be the ones who carry whatever role role we start now, and whatever seeds we plant now. In the next 50 years to 100 years, the youth of today are going to be the people who advocate for tomorrow. So they cannot be left out of that conversation. They have to be a part of it. And ways to engage them will be first to educate them at the really grassroots level. If you see what is happening to the youth today, and by youth I mean even from maybe not as low as kindergarten, but like school-age children and so forth, that's the age where the narratives are created. That is the age where the indoctrination starts. And I think we, as parents, as brothers and sisters, as aunties, as nenes, we need to start to educate them and to make them fall in love with who we are, with our culture, and with the diaspora. First, it starts there. If they don't love it, if they don't care about it, they're not going to fight for it, period. The second thing is we need to give them a sense of ownership, and we need to give them a seat at the table, right? That ownership comes from engaging them in what we are doing. That could be the narratives that are said in the media, social media, for example, the narratives that are said around entrepreneurship, right? Showing them success stories, and the narratives that are said, that are shared even generally about, being part of this bigger African diaspora. And the third way we can engage the youth is by showing them the opportunities that come with being in the fields in which we need them. I became a doctor because I was shown what a beautiful career and what a beautiful life being a doctor will be. People become accountants because they think money, money, money. But if people don't see how they can make a life in agriculture, in import-exports, in actually running a business, in being in the tourism industry, if people cannot see what power they have in being in the media and being the one to tell the story and to change that narrative, they are not going to be a part of it. The youth also want, just like we want, the youth want to know that, if I go into this career, I will not just love it, but I'll also make a living and make money out of it. And I'm a very strong advocate for the media because I know that with the stories that we share, with the narratives that we share, we can change, like literally how people see a place. Imagine, I remember being in high school watching video clips of Nelly and Kelly singing Dilemma. That song is still in my head. Y'all know Dilemma, right? You know Dilemma, right? And I knew that, oh my gosh, I want to go to America. I want to go to New York. I want to go to Times Square. That was from early ages, very tender age. That is the power of the media. The way we dress, the way we do our makeup, the way we do our hair, the way we do everything that we do is because we have been taught either at home or in the media. And if we don't show the youth the way, like avenues and ways in which you can not just impact their race or their generation, but also make money out of just rooting for who we are and advocating for our culture and for our race in general, they're not going to do it. So those are the suggestions that I have in engaging them, because I know that the youth are going to be the one who carry whatever seeds we are planting today.
Thank you, Dr. Afana. Kenneth?
I think I would like to start off by, thinking about mentorship. I think a lot of times we don't invest a lot in terms of mentorship of the youth. And I think, I look at myself as an example. There are a lot of things I think I would have done differently. Not that I didn't turn out successful, but I would have done a few things differently if I had the right mentors. So I think for us, it starts off from in terms of engaging with the youth, helping them, create pathways, helping them avoid some of the pitfalls or mistakes we would have made. And of course, helping them understand some of the right decisions to make and providing all the support they need. Because when you think about it, a lot of things we are having conversations today will definitely be driven by the youth. There's so many things that by the time some of these things start panning out, some of us would have probably gotten to retirement age and all of that. So it's important to have this sort of investment in the youth. Thinking about things like entrepreneurship and startups, when you look at the average age of those who are going into entrepreneurship right now, startups, both African and Caribbean, is driven by the youth. So that's a very strong case to make whatever investment we need to make, both from a mentorship standpoint, both from a capital standpoint, and of course, both from an exposure to opportunities, that we need to have. And trust me, the youth could actually be strong bridge builders. You see youth traveling from the Africa, Caribbean, and all of that, going for international students, going to study, and all of this. These are ambassadors we are building. So if we really want to talk about stakeholders being those sort of champions or individuals who sort of highlight, showcase the opportunities, there lies that subset. So it's important for us to make a lot of investments in terms of that. Even when you take it back to some of the sectors I talked about, I highlighted a lot. I talked about arts, culture, and the creative. Who is driving the creative? Who is driving arts? Who is driving music between both regions? It's the youth. It's the youth. No one I'm probably not gonna become the next Davido or Burna Boy or something. My time has passed. So it's all the investment has to go into the youth. So you can see that they are the engine. And the earlier we started creating platforms for engaging them, be through mentorship, be through supporting them with up-to-date advice, be through creating pathways. And of course, the last one, connecting them with opportunities, letting them access our network and investing within them, because they are the future, they are the tomorrow, and they are the next generation leaders. So I implore every one of us on this call as well, because in the summit right now, think about a youth or a couple of youth, some of you who are already doing that. Try to invest in your time. Try to invest your time in them. Try to support them. Try to give them mentorship. It's a very rewarding experience. I do that. I sit on a lot of youth-driven boards, and every time I'm called upon to speak on them or provide support, I always relish the opportunity, because I know that if I had some of those opportunities, I probably would have done something differently. So those are my assertions at this point.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. As we begin to wrap up, I would like us to move from ideas to intention. I'll ask each of you to leave us with one action that we can take into 2026. What is one concrete action that governments, businesses, or individuals can take this year to meaningfully advance Africa-Caribbean collaboration?
What we need to do is move from talk to action. We need to have sustainable frameworks in place. Yes, it is wonderful to have the memorandums of understandings, the MOUs, etc. But we do need sustainable frameworks, and that is what we need to focus on going into 2026, not just on a government level, but on a corporate level as well. We need to stop waiting for governments and multilaterals to set our economic agendas. The private sector has a huge role to play in that as well. So do the financial institutions.
Thank you, Alisha.
One action, since I'm traveling with Clem, I would say plan the trip, set the trade mission, put a date on the calendar and plan the trip. I think if the government executives, who hold the higher power, actually decide to plan the trip. And the reason I say trip is because when you go and you have those discussions face to face, you can see things on the ground. You can actually have the conversation. So plan the trip, make it happen, and at the end of that trip, set clear goals that you follow up on, until it's achieved. So I would say, plan the trip, the trade mission, and make it happen.
Thank you, Dr. Afana. Kenneth?
Yeah, I think just to add to what Dr. Clem, because trade mission, that's my word. So, but I think yes, I think I would say organize a lot of trade missions from Africa and Caribbean both ways, but especially focus from general diplomatic missions to very sector specific. Let's talk about deal routes. So they have to be sector specific with clear deliverables and public and private-driven trade missions. There's no need just taking only government officials. No, you need to take private sector people on those trade missions, because they are the engine. They are the ones. Government makes policy. Private sector builds businesses. So I think having trade missions, sector-specific, public-private as the attendees, and then coming up with MOUs around different sectors and with very clear deliverables. For me, low-hanging fruits, easy to deliver. It's not rocket science. It's just all about intentionality and the stakeholders being very serious about it.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. I now invite questions from the floor to the panelists. I invite Kevin to provide support for this. So Kevin will move with the microphone. If you have a question, please pose the question. There's a question to the back, from the back.
In the Caribbean, we have different currencies: the EC dollar, the Bajan, the Trinidadian, the Jamaican. In Africa, you have similar problems, so many different currencies. How could we manage that currency system?
Kenneth?
Well, I mean, there's been a whole conversation around floating singular currencies, on the continent, in Africa, of course, and I'm sure they might have been those conversations as well in the Caribbean. But I think it comes with a lot of conversations, and especially when, and I can speak more on the African side, where in my experience, even when you want to implement policies or things as big as floating a singular currency, when you have countries spread across that have uneven levels of infrastructure, banking systems, and all of that, it becomes very complicated. It's something that I want to see. I think it will really be a great thing to have a singular currency, whereby that's a traded currency, and move away from, they would say typically you have to trade in the USD and all of that. But personally, I don't really have a model on top of my head that I think this is how it will work, but I think it's definitely conversations that are ongoing and has been floated a few times, at least within the last 1 or 2 decades.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. We can entertain only one more question in the interest of time.
Is it because we are more globalized, or looking at a more globalized way of things? Does that mean we'll be breaching the boundaries when it comes to the currencies and stuff?
Kenneth?
From a boundary standpoint, I think it's more of, first of all, there need to be harmony in terms of, so for example, when you look at like unions like the European Union, when you pay attention to the way some of the financial transaction and all of that is being conducted within those spaces, you will find that there's a lot of unison in terms of policies. Policies have been very intentionally designed to align. So sometimes, like as someone who has lived in 3 European countries, I see similarities in terms of the way the banking system in Sweden is in comparison to the way the UK system is. In Africa, it's a little bit of a different story. And that's because, like I said, a lot of the countries are, in terms of where they are, in terms of advancement of technology, infrastructure, and all of that, is so disjointed. So that makes a lot of things more complicated. We talk about the Africa AFTA agreement, which is the free trade agreement. Some countries have adopted it, they're already moving. Some others don't even have the basic infrastructure to kickstart anything. So that even makes it harder when you start moving to the conversations around trading in one currency, because there needs to be some background work to ensure that there's a level playing ground. Otherwise, like I always say in policy, you create what I call the dark side. In solving a problem, you create multiple problems and disadvantage some other regions that are already struggling. Now, I don't know the whole intricacies because that's more like an economist conversation, but I'm just speaking based on the experience and perspectives that I have around it. But I think that's a wonderful question.
I will also add to that point, globalization doesn't help everyone, right? And in Africa, I think there's something similar happening, if not in Brazil, in Venezuela, where they are, and some countries in the Middle East, where they are moving away from the mainstream currency to use a specific currency that benefits the different parties for their trading agreements. In Africa, one thing that could be interesting to look at will be by regions. The Central African region, for example, uses a specific currency, and that is by colonial heritage, a currency that we've been trying to move away from. Different regions, East Africa is a different story, North Africa also is a different story. So it will be interesting, or it will be wiser for this conversation, when these conversations are being had, to actually operate either by regions or make specific agreements with different countries, because to Kenneth's point, some countries are still under the hold of their, previous power that had the hold on them. So getting rid of that colonial currency, it's a lot harder than just saying it. It has to do with like looking at the deals that were made in the past, looking at, how it affects all their investments in the country. So it's not going to be something that is just going to be like, flip the switch, we are done. It's going to require a lot of negotiation, but I also don't think that it should be something that should prevent people from having those conversations and from starting. Because if they see the benefit in moving forward, I think if anything at all, it will accelerate, the decolonization of even those currency systems.
Thank you very much, Dr. Afana and Kenneth, for your responses. I want to thank our panelists for their presentation. Thank you to Alisha Ali, to Dr. Clementine Afana, and to Mr. Kenneth Oguzie for your insights, and to our audience for your engagement in this very important conversation on the future of Africa-Caribbean collaboration. The Fire Talk panel ends here. Thank you very much for your attention.